What is up, you sexy YouTube mother lovers? We've got a lot to talk about. This is a Krinkov for a giant. No, this is the newest iteration of the AK-50 and AK-50 BMG. And it's real. I'm touching it. For those of you who are new to the channel, the AK-50 has kind of been a passion project of mine for almost since I started the YouTube channel. We first announced we were doing the project in 2016, and then we ended up getting our first firing prototype in late 2017.
3, 2, 1.
That firing prototype that we called the V1 is also the prototype that we got cycling for the first time. Not just a static fire, we actually got the proper gas settings and everything to be able to make that sucker extract and eject. It took about a year to dial all that in. Like I said, we weren't working on it full time, but you know, this stuff does take a little bit of time even after we sat down and committed some time to it. Learned a lot from V1, so I wanted to make a lot of changes. And frankly, me constantly making changes is kind of why it's taken this long to get another firing prototype. Is just when I think I'm happy with something, I get it in my hand and I have a better vision for it. Or we just realize it's not gonna fucking work. One of the biggest changes I decided to do is I wanted to see if we could do it stamped, which is why we've got what looks like Frankenstein's monster here. You see, the V1 was on a milled receiver, which was, that receiver cost me about $6,000 to make. Super heavy, super thick, super just, expensive. About yay long with a solid billet 4140 steel that had to be painstakingly moved away. Prototyping stuff is not cheap. So for ease of manufacture and reducing cost, I really thought we could do an AKM style stamped receiver. Now, we had a couple of designs for it, but before we went whole hog into stamping dies and doing expensive, stamping prototypes and things like that, we just wanted to see if it was fucking possible. Which is why we're using basically an off-the-shelf steel tube. Yeah. We actually redesigned our front trunnion, rear trunnion, and buffer system, and bolt, carrier, bolt, everything, to kind of fit the parameters of using an off-the-shelf piece of rectangular tubing, or square tubing rather. So some of the dimensions are a little funky, but it should work. Ish. Realistically, the point of this is to see if the receiver, the stamped receiver, is going to bow, to flex. Are the rivets going to work? Do we have enough rivets? Are the rivets strong enough? Is there too much front end leverage? Is the front trunnion going to fall out? These are things I don't really know, but I have a feeling we're going to find out. What we're also going to find out is, can we actually switch back to the single spring system? And is that going to stand up to 50 BMG recoil? The recoil spring system here, we've got our recoil buffer in the back, just in case it gets a little bit too much love. But we've got our recoil spring here, which is kind of taking a little bit of inspiration from the Saiga 12 style spring, where we've got our normal recoil spring here in the back. It's like a telescoping tube, kind of like a milled AK would have or an RPK would have. And then on the front end, we just have an assistance spring that fits on. Like, one of the problems that we had on V1 is realizing that this actually has to do, the spring has to do more than 50% compression, which is the max for an AK spring, because it can only compress into the space of itself because it's two halves. The other one, we just clipped a 1911 spring onto the end, which actually fits an AK recoil spring perfectly, like it actually clips on. This one, we have something a little bit more permanent. This is just kind of like the Saiga 12 does it, where you have a little tube there that fits on the spring, and the loose spring is captured by the bolt carrier itself. And then the recoil spring just fits back neatly in there. And then we've got a much stronger buffer there in the rear, just in case you have a round with a little bit more ass to it. One of the other things that we did for testing is the boys actually welded on mounts to put this onto a Bren tripod. In lieu of recent events, we thought it was better to take safety kind of seriously this time around when dealing with 50 BMG, especially on a prototype we're not sure is going to work. Obviously, this is going to be a shoulder-fired rifle when it's finished, but for the time being, tripod and a string is probably the way we're going to be testing this, especially since we got a lot of concerns with this one. Yeah, let me count the ways this could explode. So our front trunnion looks super beefy. I've showed it off in prior videos. It's now heat treated and everything, but which is why it's got that darker color. But it didn't provide as much support as we were hoping. In order to thread the barrel in and cut the threads into this, we actually had to take away quite a lot of material from the chamber itself, which is only supported by the front trunnion, which is also very skinny. Not terribly worried about the lugs on that, because the lugs are similar dimension to that of the V1, which were fantastic. More so worried about the chamber and the front trunnion itself just renating. Part of that is due to having to cut some of this away on the sides to fit the stamped sheet metal over the sides. We also had to cut away a little bit to have clearance in the back for the rivets that we did on here. So like I've said in the past, we've got 2 long rivets here that go all the way through and smash kind of like a long rivet on a rear trunnion of an AK. And we got the 2 short rivets up here. They're not the prettiest rivets in the world. We were kind of surprised that our tooling could actually handle the size rivets that we used, but they're solid, I think. And we also have the press fit barrel pin, just like the AK, which I think is pretty neat. The other thing we're not sure about is that because this tube is mild steel, these receiver rails could just warp, this whole thing could just split wide open, and the bolt carrier could go free willy out the back or through the top, which is another reason why tripod. Metal could also stretch around where the rivets are, you know, because we've dimpled all of these, we've dimpled them in and then riveted on top, so the metal could just stretch and just, you know, pry itself free. Also worried about the rear trunnion here, because this is going to be soaking up a lot of force. This is like a 5-pound bolt carrier group, so you're going to be stopping a lot here, little buddy. But we've reinforced it adequately with these long rivets here that, again, are also dimpled. And I'm hoping this buffer is going to make that a little bit easier on it. Taking this carrier out, take that out. Got a super long piston here. Since this is long stroke, to fit into the gas block, you kind of need that distance, ladies. And if you've seen the bolt face here, we also have the cutaway for that shark fin style ejector. I don't know how well you can see that. So right there, you probably can see it a little bit better. We've got our shark fin right there that is basically just gonna serve to kick out that brass. We've all got our concerns about that because we're worried about it impacting the rear rim of the brass and just completely chewing that brass to shit, because a lot of people like to reload their 50 BMG because, let's face it, it's fucking expensive. But there's one way to find out. Oh, and you also can see here that this is a standard AK fire control group. Now, in all the beta tests that we did with blanks and primers and things like that, the AK fire control groups actually held up pretty well as far as being able to punch 50 BMG primers every time with our firing pin setup that we have. Magazine, of course, standard 10-round Barrett magazine, and for the first time in AK-50 history, we actually have a working mag catch. That's pretty neat. We figured out roughly where our feed angle is, so we felt comfortable finally putting one of these bad boys in there, because honestly, this thing just looks so much fucking better with the magazine. What kind of ammo are we going to be using? Well, we're going to be running primarily 50 BMG Hornady AMAX ammunition. In my opinion, this is the most consistent stuff that we've been able to find. Worked the best out of the V1, so why rock the boat? It's kind of hot. I think it's like 750 grains, which, holy shit. But it's new manufactured, it's good stuff. It's also like 10 bucks a round though. And we bought a lot of it. Which is why I'd like to quickly thank No Name Ammo for helping us out and purchasing some of the ammo for us. We appreciate that. If you'd like to go check them out, I've got the link in the description and in the pinned comment. Big supporter of the channel right now, and they're the reason why we can afford to do 50 testing at the moment. Ammo prices are already ridiculous, so 50 BMG, kind of pricey. So yeah, she's together. The real question is going to be, does she stay together? Will she fire? Will it explode? Will it cycle? Those are the questions we have to answer. We have honestly changed a lot about this gun, so drawing conclusions from V1 really isn't an option here, just because so much of this has changed since then. There's a lot of shit that's brand new that we're testing on this, a lot of shit we've never tested before, so really, it's kind of anybody's game, and there's a lot that's really sketchy, and frankly just one-off prototype Frankenstein solutions on this bad boy. So if you have any predictions, please let me know in the comments. So what are we hoping to get from this? Because this is definitely not a pre-production prototype by any means. Realistically, we're just trying to figure out, even though the dimensions are way skinnier on certain things than they should be, that's almost more helpful, because if it does detonate, we know that we really do need to beef that part up. We want to learn if the stamped receiver is something that will even work. Will the rivets hold up? Is the barrel profile too skinny? Is there too much leverage on the front end? Will the AK fire control group, standard AK fire control group, be able to handle the recoiling mass of this bolt carrier and the velocity, whatever that ends up being? Will the single spring work? Will it be able to cycle? And if it does cycle, will it be able to feed for the magazine? See, we've got an old AK-50 prototype V1 to cycle, but we were never able to get it to cycle before it died, or at least started having seizing issues. We were never able to get it to cycle a round, eject one, and then load another from a magazine. That's a huge hurdle that we're gonna try to get over. Will the lugs detonate? What do we need to gas with our current bolt carrier ratio to weight with the spray? There's a lot of shit at play. Will I need to plug my neck? We don't really know. But that's the kind of data that we're hoping to get, and that's why we built this prototype, because this was much, much cheaper than the other prototype we did, and much cheaper than trying to go all out right off the bat. So if we can learn a lot from this, then next time around we can go into a much better looking prototype that's better thought out. We could start looking at things like optic mounting, how our aesthetics are gonna look. As long as we can figure out that the bones of the gun work, then we can start moving on to the cool shit, and I feel comfortable spending a little bit more money on it. So this gun, as you see it here, pretty much ready to test fire. And to be honest with you, it's kind of why I'm here. Trust me, I wasn't leaving Texas unless it was for something special. So by the time this video comes out, I will probably have already known what happened to this prototype. Do you think me and the team know what we're doing, or are we way out of our depth on this one? And honestly, by the way this thing looks currently, I really won't blame you no matter what you think. But I will cut you a deal. So we did the AK-50 Light, the 50 Beowulf video. We said if that Curse Gun Images video got over 50,000 likes, I'd do the 50 Light video. If this video gets over 100,000 likes, I'll show you what happens to this prototype, even if it goes terribly. Depending on how terribly it goes, we might have to put it on Live Leak and not on YouTube. I'm super excited. I know a good bit of you are super excited. I guess that's all there is to say. Let's see what happens. But I did just want to give you guys this quick AK-50 update. I know you've been asking for one, and we've been teasing at this a lot, so I wanted to go ahead and give you this much before this thing possibly does the thing. Anyhow, guys, I greatly appreciate you watching the video. Wish me luck, and as always, I'll probably see you sexy YouTube mother lovers in the next video. Thanks. It could also stretch where the receiver rivets are riveted.